The Jets are as good as any team in the NFL at corner. At safety, there are some question marks, but there's also potential. We're talking the Jets secondary ahead on Locked On Jets.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, July 24th, 2023, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com. Thanking you so much for making this show your first listen or first watch every day. Subscribe to the show for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so that you'll get new episodes as soon as they're posted. If you're listening on a podcast source and enjoy the show, please give it a 5-star review. If you're watching this episode on YouTube and enjoy it, give it a big thumbs up. These things help us out and help other Jets fans find the show. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We are going to continue our look at the Jets across their roster. We've talked about the skill positions. We've talked about how they look in the trenches over the last couple of days. Now we're going to turn our attention to the secondary. And we can begin with corner. And I will say this. Not only do I think cornerback is the best position group on the Jets, not only would I say the Jets have one of, if not the best groups of corners in the NFL, I would say that the Jets group at corner is probably up there when we're just talking about position, when we're talking about players at any position in the league at all for one team. I mean, that is up there. That unit has outstanding players at the top. It has elite level talent. It has good supporting players, and it has backups with experience. I mean, if you ask me what 3 things I'd want number 1, top level talent, elite players. Jets have 1, maybe 2 in that group at corner. You want quality supporting players like a Michael Carter II in the slot. And you want backups who, even if they're not necessarily starting level players, have starting experience. Guys who are still young, still have potentially some room to grow, and have that background where they're not going to be overwhelmed, at least if they're on the field, where at least they know that they've started games in this league before. They've at least played quality games, even if it's not consistent. And maybe that's why they're backups. So Jets have a little bit of everything at the cornerback position. And I've actually changed my mind on something in the NFL over the last couple of years. I used to think on the defensive side of the ball, there's always the debate. Would you rather have the pass rushers or would you rather have the corners? And of course, on some level, the question is academic because really you need both. It's not one or the other. The ideal should be to be good everywhere. The 2 positions, the 2 spots on the field on the defensive side of the ball that are most important are defensive linemen who can get to the quarterback and corners who can cover. And I used to be of the mindset that if I could only have one, of course you want to have both, but if I could only have one, I used to say I want pass rushers. But I've changed my mind, and I will tell you why I've changed my mind on that. Unfortunately, the Jets don't have to make this choice. They're good at both areas. But I actually think corners who can cover are more valuable. And the reason for that is that the NFL has changed its rules, and this is an ongoing thing. If you follow the history of professional football, it's pretty much just been, for over a century, a situation where the league has consistently tried to encourage the passing game because the passing game is what interests fans. Fans can talk all they want about how they love defense, how they love hard-hitting football, and maybe that's true to an extent. It's really, though, the number one thing that gets fans excited is the passing game and the quarterbacks. And, of course, if you follow the NFL, it doesn't matter how long you've been following it, the rules consistently change to incentivize passing. And it's to the point where corners really can't touch receivers. If you even put a fingertip on a receiver, you can draw a flag in today's NFL. So if you find somebody who can actually work around those rules and cover effectively, it's one of the most valuable commodities you can get. I'm not saying that pass rush is insignificant. Obviously, you want a lot of pass rushers, but there are pass rushers available. There's almost no corners who can cover one-on-one in the NFL with the rules they have to live with. So when you find one of the few guys who can, it's like finding gold. And that's what the Jets did a year ago when they drafted Sauce Gardner out of Cincinnati. And I want to be careful with how I say this because, as you know, in the next couple of days, we're going to see an all-time Jets corner inducted into the Hall of Fame. And what I'm not going to tell you that Sauce Gardner is going to have a better career than Darrelle Revis. But if you go back 15, 16 years as a Jets fan, one thing you probably know is that Sauce Gardner's rookie season was better than Darrelle Revis's rookie season. It took Revis maybe about half a season to a full season to really turn into a top-level corner. And beyond that, it took 2 seasons before people noticed. Revis's second season under Eric Mangini in 2008, he developed into a top 3 corner. You could argue in that 2008 season, he was the best corner in the NFL. But nobody really noticed it. It wasn't until Rex Ryan took over in 2009 and Rex Ryan started talking up Darrelle Revis, and he built his system around Revis, and Revis dominated the best receivers in the NFL on a weekly basis that people really took notice. There was a kind of a lag time between people noticing how dominant Revis was from the point where he became dominant. Sauce Gardner was dominant right off the bat. In fact, here's the other thing about Revis. In that 2009 season, he led the league in passes defensed. Teams were targeting him. He did not yet have the reputation of being a guy you just look away from. Sauce Gardner's already there. And I think part of playing corner in this league is that you eventually develop this mythology that prevents teams from even throwing at you. And if teams don't throw at you, you're not going to give up completions. So at some point, just the narrative around you can turn you into a dominant player, because if teams don't think they can throw at you, they won't even try. So you don't necessarily need to, there's not a lot you need to do if you're a great corner. And the other thing I'll say is that I mentioned all these rules that are in place that lead to flags being thrown on corners. One thing you may know in the NFL, you see, this is very pronounced at the quarterback position with the roughing the passer penalties. Stars get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to calls. And something you're going to notice that this year when the Jets draw a lot more roughing the passer penalties because they have one of the biggest stars in the league at quarterback. Anything that was borderline that was on Zach Wilson that wasn't called last year is getting called this year. And at the corner position for the Jets with Sauce Gardner, he gets away with, kind of being more physical than other corners may. And you say this is right or wrong. Stars get calls in this league, and Sauce Gardner's getting star calls. And that's a benefit to the Jets. If the borderline calls aren't going your way, you hate it. It's a real benefit to your team when you start having players of this stature who can start getting those calls. And of course, Sauce is not alone at corner. Jets made a fantastic free agent signing last year in DJ Reed. And I would even say, I was trying to think this through. Now, I think going back to 1999, I can't think of a better signing the Jets have made in free agency from another team. Now, if you go back to 98, they signed 2 Hall of Famers. They signed Curtis Martin and Kevin Mawai. So we're going to put this in 99. DJ Reed was not better than Curtis Martin or Kevin Mawai. But since then, I can't come up. Maybe you can come up with somebody, so leave it in the comments. I can't think of anybody who's been as effective as DJ Reed was that first season, a free agent import. For the value the Jets got for him, they're not paying him a ton of money. He's getting decent corner money, but he's not getting a top-level corner money. And your number 2 corner, when you have a corner like Sauce, who other teams are just going to look away from, it is important to have a number 2 guy who can play sticky coverage, who can stay with receivers, because that's the guy who's going to see the bulk of the targets. And DJ Reed held up very well. Not a big guy, kind of undersized. In fact, when he first came into the league, there was talk, his teams, and Robert Saleh was his defensive coordinator in San Francisco. He was used as a slot corner because there was a view that because he wasn't that big, maybe he would not hold up on the outside. He plays bigger than his frame. Then Michael Carter II in the slot. If DJ Reed's underrated, Michael Carter II might be even more underrated. Guy does a really solid job. Very quiet last year. And sometimes when you're playing corner, you get a lot of attention like Sauce Gardner did. Sometimes when you're playing corner well, you just don't notice him because you're doing a good job locking up your guys. And I think Michael Carter II developed into one of the better corners in the NFL last year. And then behind them, you've got guys in Bryce Hall, and you've got Brandon Echols, and even maybe a Javelin Guidry, who not a lock to make the team, but you've got guys who at least have playing experience. And at least, maybe they can't play great for 17 games, but if you need a game or 2 out of them, they're not going to be overwhelmed because they're on the field, because these guys have experience playing in the NFL. They have experience playing in this system. And in the case of Echols and Guidry, at least, both have shown some ability to play both inside and outside. So Jets corner group, again, not just one of the best corner groups in the league, not just the best position group on the Jets. If you're talking about just generally any position group on any team, Jets corners is up there. There aren't a lot of position groups anywhere on any other team that have this degree of ability. So Jets really looking good at corner. Safety is a little bit more of a question mark. I'm not necessarily saying that the Jets are going to be bad at safety, but there are some things that need to go right for them. However, if these things do go right for them, safety could be up there. Safety could be an excellent position group. We'll discuss what needs to happen. We'll discuss the key players as we continue this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business, and you want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. And that's why you've got to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Now, the Jets have a little bit of a different method. They did not need to post listings for corners on LinkedIn Jobs. It was all about good scouting, finding Sauce Gardner early in the 2022 draft, finding Michael Carter II on day 3 of the 2021 draft, about finding DJ Reed, who was a good fit at a good price for their system in free agency a year ago. Maybe if there was a LinkedIn Jobs, though, for NFL corners, the Jets would have used it, and maybe it would have made their lives a little bit easier. Well, you can. It's easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. Then add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience, so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. This is why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, that's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Jets your first listen or first watch every day. And a big shout out to you everydayers. If you're new to the show, this is a daily podcast. We cover the New York Jets. We have new episodes each day, Monday through Friday, through the week, and then bonus episodes as needed. We're talking about the Jets secondary today. And we began the show with the dominant group the Jets have at corner. A fantastic collection of corners the Jets have. Joe Douglas, there are good things Joe Douglas has done. There's bad things Joe Douglas has done. One thing I will say for Joe Douglas, he inherited a roster in 2019 when he was hired. Trumaine Johnson, Darryl Roberts. It was an ugly situation at the corner position for that Jets team. And he has completely turned it around and turned it into one of the upper echelon groups in the NFL. Safety, things are a little bit dicier. Douglas, when he was hired in 2019, had a very dynamic safety duo in Jamal Adams and Marcus May. And you all remember what happened with Jamal Adams. Adams forced his way out of town, got traded to Seattle, and really has not been the same player since he left the Jets. And then Marcus May, unfortunately, things ended poorly between him and the team. And of the two, that one bothers me a little bit because I feel like things never should have gotten to that point. Marcus May was the type of player I think he wanted to stay. And I think he's the type of guy who should have ended his career with the Jets. He should have been a Jet for life, but he's not. So we move on. The Jets have a new safety in Adrian Amos. They tried to trade for Chuck. They didn't try and trade for Chuck Clark. They traded for Chuck Clark at the start of the offseason, a move that looked excellent on paper. And unfortunately, through nobody's fault, Clark suffered a serious knee injury and is out for the season. So to replace Clark, the Jets bring in veteran safety Adrian Amos, a former member of the Chicago Bears, a former member of the Green Bay Packers, a player who, ironically, really interesting trivia, was drafted by the Bears using a pick they got from the Jets in the Brandon Marshall trade. So in a way, that deal kind of worked out for everybody. The Jets got a fantastic season out of Brandon Marshall in 2015, and the Bears were able to draft a really good safety in Adrian Amos. Amos is an interesting player this year. In the last year from LaMarcus Joyner, the Jets got very up and down play. There were some phenomenal games like Pittsburgh. There were some not so phenomenal games like Cincinnati, a couple early Baltimore. There were some bad games in the early season from LaMarcus Joyner. I think the Jets are looking for steady play from Adrian Amos. And Amos is a bit of a question mark from the standpoint that he's coming off the worst season of his career. In fact, he's coming off the first season where he really did not play all that well. And there's always danger because he's on the wrong side of 30. When a guy has a down year, is that a sign that maybe Father Time is ticking? Maybe things are not going in the wrong direction for him? Or was it just an aberration? I think one of the things that's tricky about the NFL is there are only 17 games in the season. So you can have like a bad month, and that's only 4 games. Like in baseball, if you have a bad month, that's, 25 games or so. That's a significant sample size. In football, you can have a bad stretch, and it's just a couple of games. And it's not really that significant. 4 bad games is not necessarily the end of the world. Amos gives the Jets what you want in the safety. I mean, he can do a little bit of everything. He can play in the box. He can play the run. He can play deep. He can play the pass. He's a steadying presence. And there are different ways safeties are effective. One of the best things a team can have, though, especially a team like the Jets, where it's all about getting to the quarterback. It's all about, generating pressure, and it's about locking up coverage on the outside. Jets have their impact guys on the defensive line and at corner. So for this team that doesn't necessarily need a ton of playmaking in other spots, you want somebody steady. You want somebody who's going to prevent the 8-yard run from turning into a 30-yard run. You want to avoid, I hate to call somebody out like this, you want to avoid the plays Ashton Davis was making back in 2021, where he was constantly whiffing on tackles and turning bad plays into catastrophes. And that's one of the things Marcus May was really good at during his Jets career. Adams rightly generated most of the headlines because of his playmaking ability. But in the back of the defense, Marcus May was just playing solid football, not making many mistakes, and kind of cleaning up when one of his teammates messed up. And that's going to be what Adrian Amos's job is. And then next to him, you have Jordan Whitehead, who was a free agent signing from Tampa Bay a year ago, who was similarly up and down. Whitehead is definitely a guy who I think is better closer to the line of scrimmage than he is playing the deep part of the field. But today's NFL, we're kind of seeing this this change where you're seeing less of and these things go in cycles schematically. For a while, and this was kind of a product of Pete Carroll's success with Seattle. For a while, you saw cover 3 become the dominant defense in the NFL. And Robert Saleh's off the Pete Carroll tree. So cover 3 means that there are 3 guys. You split the assignments for the deep part of the field into thirds. The 2 outside corners take the deep outside thirds, and then there's 1 safety who takes the middle third of the field. And the other safety plays close to the line of scrimmage to help against the run. That was the dominant defense for a while, but we're kind of shifting things because of the way the passing game is growing. We're kind of seeing a return to, I think, more 2 safety looks, 2 guys deep, more conservative defenses, kind of trying to entice the other team to run it because the boxes are lighter. You're trying to avoid giving up the big play. And while it's not necessarily Whitehead's forte, it also is when he's not the only deep safety, it's a little bit easier. When you're playing 2 deep coverage, you're only responsible for your half of the field. It's just a little bit easier to play the safety position. You don't have quite as much on your plate as you do when you're the single high safety. So, I think the biggest thing for Whitehead is just don't be a weakness. If he can avoid the plays where he's whiffing, if he can avoid the plays where he runs himself out of the play, the Jets can survive with I really think the Jets can survive with what they have at the safety position. And if Adrian Amos returns to form, safety position can be a strength. I feel like when Whitehead's like your second best safety, and it was when he's like, I don't know, the 8th best player on your defense, you're in pretty good shape. You just wouldn't be in good shape if Jordan Whitehead was your best safety and like the 3rd best player on your defense. So, well, Whitehead's not great. He's also not terrible. So if he's, in the current defensive structure, I think you can live with what you've got. And then another guy who's been getting a lot of buzz during the offseason, who's been flashing in training camp, Tony Adams, kind of a lower profile pickup the Jets made. He has a lot of speed. His time testing was pretty good when he came out of college. Guy who reportedly has been making plays in the offseason program, one of the reported early stars in training camp. I never like to go too deep into that, though. I think you can get a little carried away with a couple early practices where not everybody's focused on performance. A lot of times guys are just trying to prepare themselves for the season and not necessarily focused on maximizing their own production, but worth a look. It's worth keeping an eye on Tony Adams at this point because it's not inconceivable he could earn a role on this team, perhaps as a number 3 safety. Perhaps, he could even push one of the 2 starters. So we'll keep our eye on it, though. There's potential here, though, and I think really for the safety position for the Jets, because you've got so much impact talent on the line and at corner, you don't need to return to the days of Adams and May. You just need guys who play stable, guys who do their job effectively, guys who avoid mistakes. And if they can do that, the Jets will be in plenty good shape at the safety position. Now, ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast, we'll close out our show. There are a couple guys who I think are worth mentioning, but not for what they do in the secondary. While they're nominally listed as one's a corner, one's a safety, their roles on this team now are really more about what they do on special teams. We'll talk Justin Hardy. We'll talk Ashton Davis as we continue on this Monday edition of the Locked On Jets podcast. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here on this Monday. We're talking about the secondary for the Jets. We're talking about corners. We're talking about safeties. But I want to turn our attention to the third phase of the game, special teams. And if you're a longtime listener, you know that I really focus on special teams. I think special teams does not get enough attention in this league. about 20% of the plays happen on special teams. And I think one of the biggest reasons special teams don't really get their due is you see a lot of backup players there. You don't get like the starting wide receivers playing on special teams. You don't see starting linemen. You do occasionally see a starting lineman on like the field goal block team, but you don't see the starting linebackers. It tends to be backups, lower profile players. But sometimes these guys can really turn into valuable contributors for your team. Your number 6 corner is not going to get a lot of coverage opportunities. You're not going to put him one-on-one with the game on the line against the other team's best receiver unless you have a ton of injuries. So his role on the team is really to play special teams and do it effectively. And Justin Hardy was a guy the Jets signed a couple of years ago. And you have to remember, at the point the Jets signed Justin Hardy, they had an uncharacteristically poor year on special teams. There was one season where even though Brant Boyer, was a good coach, the Jets just had a disaster year on special teams. And one of their first signings was Justin Hardy, who was a special teams ace with New Orleans. And he plays on all sorts of different special teams units. He led the Jets in special team snaps a year ago. But one area, and he actually made the Pro Bowl, one area where he's really effective, though, is as a punt gunner. And it's kind of weird to say that anybody could be a Pro Bowl player on a unit that gave up a pair of punt returns, one of which cost them a game in New England. But Justin Hardy was tied for the NFL lead among gunners in punt that tackles on punts last year with 13. Guy who does a really solid job in that, and guy who's probably a little underappreciated just because you see him, he's always at the bottom of the roster. In fact, this time of year, you'll always see speculation about Justin Hardy. Is he going to make the team? Is he on the bubble? And so far, he's always made the team. And there have been some groans about it, but then he goes out and does a good job on special teams. And I think, again, a little underappreciated because I think people underestimate the role a player like this can have. When the other guy, and this is not a guy who's been a favorite of mine, but that's mainly because of his play at safety, that's Ashton Davis, who actually had the 3rd most special team snaps for the Jets a year ago. I'll still say it. I don't want to see any Ashton Davis anywhere near the safety position. I think he takes terrible angles. I don't think he's got great instincts for the game. But he's carved out a role on special teams. Again, he's another guy who plays all sorts of different units. He'll play on coverage units for kickoffs and punts. He'll be a blocker on kick returns and punt returns. He actually is the person. He actually, for a point last year, took on the role as the personal protector in the punting game. And that's a really important role. That's like kind of the last line of defense before you get to the punter. So it's very difficult to quantify what a player does on special teams, unless it's like a Justin Hardy and he's throwing up crazy tackle stats as a punt gunner. It's difficult to kind of assess how effective a player is. So one of the things I look at is, who does Brant Boyer like putting on the field? Because Brant Boyer is a good coach. I think the Jets are in good hands with this guy as their special teams coach. So I know you could question me. I know you could kind of laugh at me and say, well, your analysis is who is Brant Boyer giving the snaps to? Well, again, it's difficult to quantify these things. I don't think Ashton Davis was like a special teams ace or anything, but I think he does, from what I could see, he's done a pretty effective job on special teams. And it's a situation where, I do trust Brant Boyer, because Brant Boyer is not going to stick a guy on the field if he doesn't believe that guy is going to be effective. And I know, I'm giving a coach here a lot of leeway, but I think Brant Boyer, I wouldn't do this for like other coaches on the Jets, but I trust Brant Boyer. I think he's done an excellent job as the special teams coach on this team. And the fact that Ashton Davis is so trusted, that to me at least says that he's a player worth having on the special teams unit. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. As always, if you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you enjoy the show and are listening on the podcast source, give it a 5-star review. And if you're watching this episode on YouTube and enjoy it, give it a big thumbs up. These things help us out, help other Jets fans find the show. Have a great Monday, everybody. We will be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.